Hey, everyone. Welcome back. Thanks for liking the earlier videos. Today's deep dive is the continuation of yesterday's video. There are lots of things left behind, so I thought to request Jack and Wilson to discuss it more in depth. Let's see what they have to say. But before that, I request all of you to hit the subscribe button because over 85% of you don't subscribe. Your one click on the subscribe button means a lot to me. Please just don't ignore this request and hit the subscribe button. Let's move on to the next section.
All right, welcome everybody to another deep dive. We're going to take a look today at a pretty cool kind of intersection between history and science.
Yeah.
And specifically, we're going to be looking at some recent discoveries in the history of astronomy.
Right.
So super cool stuff.
Yeah, very interesting.
So let's get into it. So the area that we're going to kind of zero in on today is the medieval Islamic world. And we're going to look at the contributions of a particular scholar named Ibn Alzaraloo.
Right.
Now, Ibn Alzaraloo, he lived around the turn of the 12th century. And his work is kind of a window, I think, into the sophistication of astronomical thought at that time.
Oh, for sure.
So the big question we're going to tackle today is, what exactly did this guy figure out about the moon's movement?
Okay.
And we're going to really focus on something known as the moon's annual motion, I guess. We're going to try to understand that. So in order to understand all this, we've got a few key pieces of information to kind of help us along the way. There's an article, a recent one. It was just published in February of this year. It's titled, Ibn Alzaraloo's Discovery of the Annual Equation of the Moon.
Right.
And this is from the website muslimheritage.com. We're also going to be looking at the Muslim Heritage website itself, just to kind of give us that broader context.
Yeah.
And then we've also got a CNN.com article, and this one's really cool, I thought. It's called Muslim Inventions That Shaped the Modern World.
Right.
So those are kind of the pieces that we're playing with today. Our goal is to understand this particular scholar's contribution, this Ibn Alzaraloo guy.
Okay.
What did he figure out about the moon's orbit?
Yeah.
And then also just kind of appreciate the wider scientific landscape that was happening in the medieval Islamic world.
Got it.
So before we jump into the scholar's specific work, maybe we need to just kind of set the stage a little bit.
Right.
What was the prevailing understanding of the cosmos and the moon especially?
Okay, so going back, a long time, the prevailing model for how things work was Ptolemy's geocentric model.
Right.
This was the idea that the Earth is at the center of everything.
Okay, so the Earth doesn't move, everything else moves around the Earth.
Exactly. And he came up with a very complex system using what are called epicycles and deferents.
Okay.
To explain the movement of celestial bodies, like specifically the moon, for instance.
Okay.
So imagine, if you will, the moon moving on a small wheel, it's called the epicycle. And then that small wheel itself is moving along a bigger circle called the deferent around the Earth.
Right.
So it's this intricate system of circles within circle.
Okay, so it's you've got basically like a small wheel moving along a bigger wheel, and the small wheel is carrying the moon.
Exactly.
And then that whole thing, that whole shebang is orbiting the Earth.
Right.
Okay, so but astronomers of this era weren't just like blindly following Ptolemy.
No, not at all.
Like they had their own observations and records and stuff like that, right?
Exactly.
So how do those things kind of come into play?
Yeah, so by Ibn Alzaraloo's time, there was a long history of astronomical observation.
Right.
And these astronomers created very detailed astronomical tables called zijs.
Okay.
One of them that's mentioned is the Momtanen,
Okay.
which was from around 830.
Yeah.
And then there's another one that is al-Batani Zij, which was from the 10th century.
Okay.
And so these provided a ton of data and also existing models that astronomers like Ibn Alzaraloo could use and compare with their own observations.
Okay, so they weren't just like accepting Ptolemy's word as like the ultimate truth. They were
Yeah.
kind of out there testing this stuff out.
Exactly. They were actively engaged.
So did these observations, did they always kind of match up perfectly with what Ptolemy was proposing?
Not exactly. One particular area where there were some discrepancies was in the timing of lunar eclipses. So the article points out that astronomers going all the way back to the 9th and 10th centuries had noted that the times that they predicted eclipses to happen didn't always match perfectly with what they actually observed.
Interesting.
And Ibn Yunus, who lived just before Ibn Alzaraloo, he also dealt with these timing errors.
Okay.
And he actually proposed a fix, although it turned out to be incorrect, that the moon's epicycle was actually smaller than what they thought.
Okay, so he's saying that maybe this wheel that's carrying the moon is actually a little smaller than we thought it was.
Exactly.
And that would account for these discrepancies.
Right.
Okay.
But that turned out to not be quite right.
Okay, so this problem of accurately predicting eclipses, it was a known issue. Like, people were aware of it.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so Ibn al-Zarqali comes into the scene.
Yes.
And there's this kind of known problem of, these lunar models, they aren't perfectly predicting where the moon is going to be, especially when it comes to eclipses. So what was his breakthrough? Like, what did he come up with?
Okay, so Ibn al-Zarqali, he identified what the recent article calls a new inequality in the moon's longitudinal motion.
Okay, so longitudinal motion, what does that even mean?
Yeah, so that just refers to the moon's position as seen along what is called the ecliptic.
Okay.
Which is basically the apparent path of the sun across the sky.
Right.
So he realized there was this extra variation in the moon's movement.
Okay.
That was not accounted for in Ptolemy's model or the earlier astronomical tables.
Right.
And he said this variation was about 24 arc minutes.
Okay, so 24 arc minutes. Now, that might not sound like a lot, but in terms of astronomy and those precise measurements, that would have been a pretty noticeable difference.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And what's really interesting is he determined that this inequality, this 24 arc minutes, wasn't constant.
Oh, okay.
It changed periodically.
Interesting.
And it followed a sine function. And the crucial factor that determined how this changed was the difference in longitude between what is called the mean moon, which is its average position,
okay,
and the solar apogee.
Okay, solar apogee. Remind me what that is again.
So the solar apogee, if you think of the Earth's orbit around the sun and how it's slightly elliptical.
Right, it's not perfectly circular.
Exactly, it's not a perfect circle.
Yeah.
The apogee is the point where the Earth is farthest away from the sun.
Okay.
In its orbit.
Okay, so we're the farthest away from the sun at that point.
Exactly.
Got it.
So he noticed that the moon's movement had this subtle variation.
Right.
That was actually linked to this point in the Earth's yearly journey around the sun.
Wow, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So the article points out that Ibn al-Zarqali's discovery was a specific instance of what we now call the annual equation of the moon.
Okay.
And this particular version or manifestation of it, it becomes most apparent during lunar oppositions, which is when lunar eclipses occur. And this basically meant that Ptolemy's prediction of the moon's exact location was slightly off.
Right.
And Ibn al-Zarqali basically, he pinpointed this missing piece, right? This variation that wasn't accounted for.
Exactly.
So he really discovered a missing piece of the puzzle as to why the moon moves the way that it does. And this piece was connected to the Earth's orbit around the sun.
Right.
Which is, I mean, that's a pretty big deal, I think, even within a geocentric framework.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely is. It shows that he was recognizing a real, albeit subtle, influence of the sun's movement from the perspective of the Earth on the moon's orbit.
Right.
So yeah, it showed a deeper appreciation for how everything is kind of interconnected up there.
Like the movements of all the celestial objects.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So was this just an isolated observation?
Not at all.
Or did this actually kind of stick around and have some impact?
So what's really cool is that this same, what we now call the annual equation of the moon, was later rediscovered independently by two big figures in European astronomy.
Right. Oh, interesting.
I'm talking about Tycho Brahe and Johannes Kepler.
Right. Big names.
Yeah, huge names. So Tycho Brahe discovered it in the late 16th century, and then Kepler kind of rediscovered it again in the early 17th century.
Wow.
So the fact that they both came to this conclusion centuries later really kind of validates the accuracy and the importance of Ibn al-Zarqali's work.
It really shows how far ahead of his time he was, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Now, the article also mentions some interesting stuff about historical misinterpretations, right?
Yeah, it does.
Surrounding discoveries from this period.
Yeah.
So can you maybe talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so basically, there was a misinterpretation that happened in the 19th century. A scholar kind of misinterpreted a passage in the work of Abu Wafa al-Bijani, who was another Islamic astronomer, lived in the 10th century. And because of this misinterpretation, people started to give this astronomer credit for the discovery of what's called the variation.
For variation.
Which is a big lunar inequality.
Okay.
So they were giving him credit for something that he actually didn't discover.
So this is really a case of just like a mistaken identity in the world of lunar motion.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
And actually, this mistake, this misattribution, sparked a pretty big debate for like 4 decades.
Wow. So people were arguing about this for 40 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then finally, another scholar, Kara DeVoe, he was the one who kind of clarified the situation.
Okay.
And he showed that Abu Wafa's work was talking about something completely different, and that this whole variation thing was a separate issue.
Okay, wow. So this whole episode of Mistaken Identity, it's kind of interesting because I'm wondering if it had an impact on how the contributions of astronomers of this time period, like how those were viewed.
Yeah, I think the article suggests that maybe it did, yeah.
Okay.
It talks about a really influential historian of science, Otto Neugebauer.
Okay.
And he had this idea that Muslim astronomers were primarily just focusing on what he called elementary Greek astronomy.
Elementary Greek astronomy.
Yeah. And so he had this view, this idea that there was kind of a lack of really original or groundbreaking discoveries.
Okay, so their work was just seen as kind of refining existing knowledge
Right.
rather than making any like big new conceptual leaps.
Right.
Huh.
But the article points out that over the past 50 years, there's been a lot of research by historians who really specialize in medieval Islamic astronomy that has kind of overturned that idea.
Okay.
And they say that Ibn al-Zarqalu's discovery is a perfect example of an advancement that went beyond just refining existing knowledge.
Right. Right.
It was really something new.
Okay, interesting. So, it's also it's kind of interesting to think about how that whole misattribution with Abu Wafa, I wonder if it made it harder for later breakthroughs by Muslim astronomers to get like the proper credit.
Yeah, I think that's possible, yeah.
Yeah.
Like maybe there was some skepticism
Right, right.
because that previous discovery was actually based on a misunderstanding.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Like if you're already kind of skeptical, you might be less inclined to like really acknowledge the true newness of these discoveries.
Right.
Okay. So let's maybe zoom in a little bit on Ibn al-Zarqalu's work itself.
Okay.
Apart from this article about his recent rediscovery, the article also mentions that there was some previous scholarly work on his modifications to Ptolemy's lunar model.
Right.
Can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah, so 2 historians well regarded in this field of Islamic astronomy, Juan Vernet and Julio Samso. They had previously highlighted that Ibn al-Zarqalu did, in fact, modify Ptolemy's model, and they specifically noted that he introduced this sinusoidal inequality that seemed to be related to the sun's orbit.
Okay.
And then in the year 2000, there was also a pretty comprehensive study on this by Puig.
Okay, cool. So it sounds like, the connection between the moon's movement and the sun's path, that wasn't necessarily a brand new thing that was just discovered.
Right.
It sounds like earlier historians had kind of already noticed that in his work.
Right, yeah. But what Essa Mozaffari, who wrote the 2024 article, has really done is definitively identify that inequality as the annual equation of the moon.
Okay.
And he's even reconstructed a plausible method for how Ibn al-Zarqalu may have arrived at that discovery.
Wow.
Based on those 37 years of observations that he made.
Wow, that's pretty amazing that
Yeah.
we can kind of, centuries later reconstruct how he might have arrived at that conclusion.
Yeah, and it just speaks to the dedication and the precision of his practice.
Yeah, totally. Okay, now the article also briefly talks about the idea that there were actually different approaches to astronomy within the medieval Islamic world itself. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so the article raises this interesting point that there were these different ways of thinking about and doing astronomy
Okay.
in the eastern and western parts of the Islamic world.
Got it.
And these different intellectual traditions likely led to a variety of ways that astronomers approached and attempted to solve these complex issues,
Right.
like the inconsistencies in the timing of eclipses.
Right.
So yeah, it wasn't just like one unified approach to astronomy in this whole region.
Right. So there's a lot more, I guess, diversity in the intellectual landscape than maybe a lot of people would think.
Definitely.
Okay, now I want to maybe zoom out a little bit.
Okay.
Because we also have the CNN article and the Muslim Heritage website itself, which they kind of show this wide range of scientific contributions from this period.
Yeah.
So we've been really focused on astronomy.
Right.
But there's so much more going on.
Right, so much more, yeah.
So, I mean, can you give us a little flavor of some of the other stuff?
Yeah, so this period that people often call the golden age of Muslim civilization was really a time of huge intellectual flourishing across all these different disciplines.
Mm.
And the CNN article, it highlights a bunch of examples. So, for instance, surgery.
Okay.
So around the year 1000, there was this guy, Alzaraloo, and he produced a very, very detailed encyclopedia of surgery.
Wow.
And it was illustrated, too.
Okay.
And it actually became a standard text in European medicine for centuries.
Wow.
And he's also credited with a lot of things, like using dissolving stitches so that people wouldn't have to get a second procedure to have their stitches removed.
Smart.
And he's also credited with inventing the surgical forceps.
Oh, wow. Okay, so this guy was really a pioneer in surgery.
Yeah, definitely.
That's incredible. Okay, what else is there?
Okay, so another thing that many people probably enjoy on a daily basis is coffee.
Right.
So coffee actually was first cultivated and brewed in Yemen back in the 9th century.
Wow.
And it was initially used by Sufis to help them stay awake during their religious practices, but then it spread to Cairo and then eventually the whole Islamic world.
Yeah.
And then centuries later, it made its way over to Europe.
Yeah, that's wild. Okay, what else?
Also the toothbrush.
Okay.
So the Prophet Muhammad, back in the 7th century, he popularized using basically twigs from the miswak tree to brush your teeth.
Oh, okay.
And the miswak tree, it actually contains natural antiseptics and abrasives, which we have in toothpaste today.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, that's kind of where the toothbrush came from.
Wow, so it's really old.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Were there any other like big technological endeavors that were going on?
Yeah, so the article highlights this guy, Abbas ibn Firnas, who was in 9th century Spain, and he actually tried to fly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he designed this winged apparatus, and he even made this documented gliding attempt.
Oh, wow. So he was really trying to get off the ground?
He was trying to fly, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And did he succeed?
No, he didn't.
Okay.
But, his pioneering efforts may very well have inspired future inventors.
Right.
And then another one in the area of mechanical engineering, al-Jazari,
Okay.
who was around in the 12th century, he developed this crank connecting rod system,
Okay.
which is now this super fundamental component in all these machines that we use today, like bikes, for instance, and even internal combustion engines.
Wow.
That was his invention.
So, it's pretty amazing to think about how some of these things that we take for granted today, like these foundational technologies,
Yeah.
they actually have their roots all the way back then.
For sure.
Wow. Okay. And then, it wasn't just about individual inventions, right?
No.
No, not at all. It was also about establishing like institutions of learning and stuff. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So the first degree granting university was founded in 859
Wow.
by Fatima al-Firhi in Fez, Morocco.
Wow.
And her sister, she built a mosque right next door, so they became this major center of learning, and they've actually been operating continuously ever since.
Wow. So almost 1,200 years.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Wow. That's amazing.
And in medicine, the idea of a organized hospital with wards for different diseases
Okay.
And teaching centers, that originated in 9th century Egypt
Okay.
with the Ahmad Ibn Tulun Hospital.
Mm.
And they provided free care for everyone who needed it.
Wow. That's really, really forward thinking.
Yeah, for sure.
And what about other like foundational fields like math, for example?
Yeah, so the very word algebra comes from the title of a treatise that was written in the 9th century by this guy, al-Khwarizmi. And he also introduced this concept of algorithms and the Indian number system, which included zero to the West.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was his contribution.
With contributions.
Yeah.
To math. Okay. What else?
And in optics, there was Ibn al-Haytham,
Okay.
who lived around the year 1000. And he basically revolutionized how we understand vision.
Okay.
He proved through experiments that we actually see because light reflects off of objects and enters our eyes.
Okay.
And this was different from the prevailing idea at the time.
Right.
And he also described the principles of the camera obscura in great detail.
Okay. So it's clear that there was so much more going on than just astronomy, right?
Definitely.
This was a time of like huge intellectual curiosity and a lot of innovation.
For sure.
And I think it really challenges this simplistic notion that there was like this dark age
Yeah.
in terms of scientific progress at this time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it sounds like this Muslim heritage website, it's really like a treasure trove of information.
Oh, yeah. It's amazing.
If people want to kind of dig deeper into all these different areas.
Exactly.
Okay, so I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah.
Let's maybe try to bring it all together for our listener.
Okay.
What is the key takeaway from all of this?
Well, the big takeaway is that Ibn al-Zarqallah in the 11th century made an original contribution to astronomy through this discovery of the annual equation of the moon.
Right.
And it was a subtle but important correction to the existing models that were out there.
Right.
And it happened centuries before it was rediscovered in Europe.
Right.
So yeah, it just highlights this advanced state of astronomical knowledge that existed in the Islamic world at this time.
Right. And I think, this deep dive that we've done today, it really emphasizes the fact that the history of scientific discovery is complicated and it's interconnected.
Mm-hmm.
And the medieval Islamic world really played this crucial role that is often underappreciated.
Yeah, I agree. And it was more than just inheriting ancient knowledge.
Right.
It's also about observation and experimentation and building on that knowledge.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And I think, this story of Ibn al-Zarqallah, it kind of prompts a question, I think, for our listeners.
Okay.
How many other modern scientific concepts might actually have their origins in these historical discoveries that are just not as well known?
Right.
So maybe this encourages us to kind of explore this idea, how knowledge is connected across different times and cultures.
Yeah.
And really appreciate all these contributions that come from different parts of the world.
Definitely.
Throughout history. So thanks, everybody, for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
We'll catch you next time.
Thank you for joining us for today's podcast. I hope you've gained some valuable insights. If you're a truth seeker, yearning for divine light and ready to step out of darkness, now is your moment. The truth is that Allah is the one and only creator of the universe. He has sent over 124,000 messengers and prophets to guide humanity, starting with Adam and culminating with the final messenger, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon them all. If you resonate with this message, you might be ready to embrace Islam. Simply recite the Shahada, the Islamic declaration of faith. For further support, feel free to join our WhatsApp group. You can send us a private message there. The link is in the video description. Don't wait until it's too late. We look forward to connecting with you soon.